Have you ever wondered, why do my plants look nothing like Instagram? Or when did all of these plants become a competition? Stick around with me and let's dive into it. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So I'm bringing up my trusty golden pothos to kind of exhibit a kind of standard, average, common houseplant. And you can see behind me, and granted this is slightly unstressed at the moment, you can see a bit of the redness is happening there, my Philodendron esmeraldense. Don't worry, there is an entirely green, a very healthy leaf that is happening at the top. This is just winter situation that is happening to that plant there. But when did this become the norm over this? Because we all need to start acknowledging when plant trends changed the hobby. This is what a lot of people used to have before, and they didn't used to have huge collections. If you think about your mum, your grandma, anybody in your family, grandparents, grandfathers, all of these things that used to have plants and maybe still do, their idea of plant care and the hobby of caring for houseplants is very different to what a lot of us consider the hobby to be now. And there are things that have precipitated this change. But let's talk a bit about what the hobby was like before the boom. So obviously in front of me, I have got a Dracaena, and it's really quite nice because it's quite tall. It means I don't have to hold it, because if I was holding it, you wouldn't be able to see the plant. And yes, this is a variegated form of Dracaena. My standard green Dracaena fragrance, I think, is upstairs. So I'm being ultimately lazy and I cannot be bothered to go upstairs and pick it up. But this lives in my living room, and it is a good example of kind of more standard, normal houseplants. I don't want to keep picking up that poor golden pothos all the time, but that is also a good example. Another good example would be something like a spider plant as well. But we need to also at least remember what this hobby used to be like before the boom. The hobby was slow. That was part of what drew people to it. It was a slow, kind of almost meditative hobby. And some people, you can still get this depending on how you manage your hobby, essentially. But it was always a slow process or a slow hobby to have. It also meant that success at that point was measured in years, not on the plant type. And back then it was a case that it was more of a local garden center or local little plant store kind of mentality. So you'd be very attached, and I still do this to a certain point, and I see some of the older crew as well, some of the older generations are still doing this at my local garden center, which is still bringing in some really interesting plants, not just the common ones. It still has a great collection of more common house plants, but that is where you can see some of the people that are always in there, and they are still doing their thing. They are still going to the local garden center, the local little plant store, even the supermarkets, and getting some of these plants, because ultimately the goal isn't to show off, is to see that I can grow this plant into something spectacular. And the reason why I brought this out actually is because when I first got this plant, it was a seedling. It was tiny, it was down here, the pot was absolutely minuscule. Look at it now. This plant is, I want to say, probably 6 or 7 years old at the moment. And could it be bigger? Yes. Is it a problem? No. This is doing its own thing in its own time. Does it maybe have some pests at the moment that I need to be dealing with? The people that have been here for a while? Yes, it does. Is it harming it? No. And that's also something that we need to remember is houseplant pests have been around for a very long time, as long as people have had houseplants. Please note how even when some of the more common houseplants get pests, very, very infrequently, unless you have completely let them go, will those pests decimate more common houseplants. Either they won't go anywhere near it, or if they do, even if you've got a severe infestation, it generally means that it's never really going to get out of hand like you might do with some of the prima donna fancy plants that happened after the boom. And that is something that, again, contributed to this slowness of the hobby. It was more counting about the years rather than, do I have the next it plant? And we need to, before I kind of wrap up this section, we need to remember about the fact that some of these plants were aspirational, believe it or not. So you might be first getting a houseplant. This is before the boom, before anybody was kind of like into like the rare and unusual houseplants. But it was kind of, I'm going to start with something like a golden pothos because I know everybody else has done that, or maybe it's Sansevieria. And the aspiration then becomes, ooh, if I can keep that alive for a few years, maybe I can kind of progress to buying like a standard begonia. Oh, look at this. Oh, or if I've got the begonia and I've done well with this begonia, and I'm not naming names of these plants because it literally was just a begonia. Can I then try a fern? Can I? And that's usually after years of doing these things. That fern, any type of fern, the simplest of ferns, becomes the big aspiration because you've moved on from a really super simple one to a slightly less simple one to a slightly less simple one again. But it was still, the aspiration was there. It was just different to what we've had in recent years. And you know where I'm going next with this one? I'm going to the rare plant era. And this was the point where there was things like, and I'll bring you an example. Variegation height. Everything needed to be variegated. And I'll put a picture here. I think I've got one somewhere that I can find from my Instagram of my Monstera alba. It's somewhere behind the shelves. I am not moving that plant. But everything needed to be variegated. And the reason why I'm bringing up the alba, but I'll come back to that in just a second. But this is a variegated Rhaphidophora. Everything needed to be variegated. Everybody was searching for these variegated plants. Another really good example is the pink princess. Oh, the caca princess. It was a thing that people were chasing after. That became the aspiration, is I couldn't just have the green version of this plant. I need to go for expert level. I'm still a bit of a gamer, so I'm just like, I'm not going to do this on easy mode. I want to do like God mode or expert level. I want the variegated plant or the tricky plant. I want to really challenge myself and show I am better than everybody else because I can keep that highly variegated plant that is also probably unstable variegation. Super happy, look at me, I am great. This is also the time where the collector mentality came through this. And I know this is rich coming from me, looking at the volume of plants behind me. I like to think, at least when it comes to myself, and maybe a few other people as well, that we probably would have ended up in crazy plant rooms like this. What's the expression that people come, some of the older generation, when they come into my house, it's like the land of the Triffids or something like that? I know there's a cultural context there. Maybe it's just the UK and it was something about a lot of plants being around. I need to look into that. But there's something about Triffids. But it's that collector mentality of like, and this is the big thing where we all keep saying this is like the Pokemon cards. I must collect them all. I must have all of them. And this is where you get the people that were just like, I can't just have the one version of like, oh, what was it? I'll come back to the Monstera albo. How many versions of variegated monsteras exist now? So there's the albo, there's the Thai, is it the Balbosaurus, which is the new one? There was the mint, there was the Aurea, there was all of these things. There was Kunzo's white monster. There's all of these different versions. And there are people out there that literally will be like, oh no, I've only got Monstera albos, but I've got every single version of that. It's like the evolution of Pikachu. You have every form of it. I only say Pikachu because I know I'm a bit too old for Pokemon, but I know one or two of the characters. It was Pikachu and Eevee and Squirtle and a few other ones. And I can visually understand them, but sorry, off topic. It's for my younger audience. I'm old. But it's that the must collect them all was around this time, when it was that kind of rare plant era. And around this time, it was the case of price equaled status, which is insane if we look back on it now and just kind of going, oh. Like there was a lot of people that were just, oh, the variegated Rhaphidophora tetrasperma sold for like 15, 20,000 pounds or US dollars, an obscene amount of money. And there was a lot of people, maybe it was just me even back then, but they're just like, oh, look, I am so proud. I managed to get this. And all I could think of in the back of my mind was, why? Why is this a status thing? Because all I could think of, maybe it's me being judgmental, but you know what, I'm going to be a bitch for a moment. I'm kind of looking at those situations even back then, and I'm just like, they saw you coming a mile away. Yes, they did. And yes, I know that some people did this and they got there first and they spent all of this money because they propagated like mad and made as much money as they possibly could. Fine. That still doesn't make you a good human being in my experience. I get it. But can you tell that I'm really glad that whole kind of era is pretty much over at this point? It's great. But we also need to kind of remember that it was that scarcity and the algorithm on both YouTube, Instagram, all of these places that really kind of ramped that up, and it kept ramping it up as well, more and more and more, because for the people that don't work in a similar field to me, because again, for the people that don't know, I do kind of web design, I do digital marketing, I also do some social media marketing as well in my business. But it's one of those things that the algorithm will see when there is demand but not enough supply. So the scarcity that was happening out in the kind of buying world, so everybody wants this plant, there's only 3 of them in the world, we are going to charge a fortune for it, because again, supply and demand, was also happening on social media. Because what would then happen is there's maybe, say, 10 pictures of this one very rare, like let's talk about the Pink Princess when it first came out. There wasn't that many people that had it, which means at that point there wasn't that many people sharing images of Pink Princess. But somebody saw this on YouTube or Instagram and all these things, and it hyped up as well. Same thing with Facebook groups, and people were searching frantically on these social sites going, oh, show me a Pink Princess, what does this look like, what are the different variations of this, what could it look like, and I've seen one picture, can I see more pictures of this, and what's happening? And all of a sudden what that is clearly telling the algorithm is there's a lot of people searching for Pink Princess, but there's only 5 pictures that I have in my whole platform. I need to be showing these pictures more and more to those people that are similar to that individual that we're searching, because it means that this is what they are searching for. And I'm going to encourage that way to get more pictures of the Pink Princess. So we've got more kind of image stock to show to all these different people that are searching for the Pink Princess. Replicate Pink Princess and use any other rare plant when it first came out, and you will get the same scenario. And this brings me nicely onto the kind of algorithm effect of it all, basically. So a lot of the times only the biggest leaves or the more mature leaves were being posted on the social sites, by content creators like myself, like people on Instagram, like people on YouTube. And you'd be getting, and I don't have a big leaf other than the obvious big leaves that you can see behind me, and there's the somewhere back there's also a Melanochrysis, or Melanochrysum as it's properly called, that has got some big leaves. But for instance, nobody would be posting very small juvenile leaves, like for instance this one here of the Epipremnum pinnatum variegated, but they would be posting, and these are small because this is how I bought it, they would be posting the more mature looking leaves, even though these are not huge, but with the splits on them. So it then became a scenario where people were just like, well, I can only have these plants, and that's what I'm striving for. And the ultimate catfish of this, I don't even think I have a picture of this plant anymore, and I've bitched and moaned about this far too much on my channel. People will know, the people that have been around, the Philodendron lupinum, and I don't know if I can find a picture, or hopefully I'll find one and put one here. The ultimate catfish of plants, because all we ever got with that one is, oh, look at how cool it looks with the lobes, and like, oh, it's so beautiful when it's mature. But what you'll get is the immature form. Look, it's Philodendron micans with a red back. And we all built those in throves, and years later, it was still a micans with a red back. And I know some people have had success on it as well. This is sour grape situation for me, but I know I'm not the only one. But there was a lot of that was happening, and it can skew because, again, think about the example that I was giving before on the social platforms with the Pink Princess. There was a demand, so people might not just be searching for Pink Princess, but they might be searching for mature pink princess, and that then becomes the trend, and that then becomes what social needs to get more pictures of, and also what the social platforms will show out. Because if it's seeing, and let's do it slightly differently. I am searching for the Philodendron melanochrysum, yeah, which is a lot of people. It was one of those trendy rare plants that had this kind of concept with it as well. So when you would search for a Philodendron melanochrysum, and I can remember this because I was around when this was all happening, and I was also doing the similar searches online on socials, because again, this wasn't stuff that people had easily in their collections because it didn't exist up until, or it wasn't a thing. It did exist, but it wasn't as big as it started to become when it started trending. You would get a lot of leaves, pictures of leaves that just looked like, it just looked like a micans, because the Philodendron melanochrysum as a juvenile plant looks almost indistinguishable to a Philodendron micans. But then people started to clock when they saw one or two people get mature plants from sellers. That's where the questionable like poaching might have happened potentially there, because again I've touched on this on another video. Like, if nobody was aware of the mature melanochrysum and nobody wanted it, how did all of a sudden a few of the sellers have like hundreds of these to sell at exorbitant prices? They probably went and got those from nature and then sold them on for that. People are aware of this, and people are a lot better at doing some critical thinking when it comes to these things now. But with the melanochrysum example that I was saying, is some people saw the mature leaves. Guess what they're going to start searching for online after they've seen a whole bunch of leaves that just look like a mican? It's just that mature melanochrysum. So what that tells the social platforms, or even Google as well if you're doing searches, is when people are searching for melanochrysum, do not serve them with results for juvenile ones or just melanochrysum. What they actually mean is they want to see the mature form of this. So all we all got was mature leaves of melanochrysum. But the one thing that people were not making the connection there, and this is why it became a lot frustrating for people, is please try to remember what we should have all been trying to remember, is that in nature, these plants do not go from juvenile leaf to mature leaf at the drop of a hat. Some of them do. Some of them have that transformation happen relatively quickly under ideal conditions, which would be their natural habitat. But a lot of them take time. And that's the thing that people were not understanding. They're just like, but I've got the Philodendron melanochrysum. Why is it not growing? Why am I not getting those huge leaves? Another great example, and I've got mine somewhere back there. It's looking busted because it's the Queen Anthurium is always going to look busted. So people are just like, but I got the Queen Anthurium. Why is it not like huge? I want the huge leaves. And it's just like, well, buy one with the huge leaves. Hopefully it isn't poached. It probably will be poached. But do you see what I mean? The disconnect was happening there, because even the algorithm of all of these social platforms, of the search platforms, was kind of working against us. It had learned what people, or at least what it thought people wanted, and that's what it kept serving to people. So they're just like, well, I got this, and it doesn't look anything like what I thought it was going to do. And okay, fine, I understand maybe that it's still juvenile, but why is it, it's 6 months later, why is it not like fully mature yet, huh? Come on, like, why is it not mature yet? And the other, and I'd be remiss in this bit when I'm talking about the algorithm to not mention, nobody showed the setbacks. Absolutely nobody was showing the setbacks. Everybody was showing, look at this big leaf. Look at how perfect this leaf is. They don't show the days and weeks of very exacting care that they needed in order to get that leaf. The same thing happened, and maybe I was one of the few people that did this when I was doing my plant reviews. And I know a lot of people were just like, but this plant is trending now. Why are you not showing us this plant? You bought it like a month ago. Surely you should be able to show it to us now. I'm just like, how would I then be any different from a lot of people, a lot of content creators that would be like, oh, look at this plant. Look at it. Isn't it beautiful? But there was also that undercurrent of, aren't I great? Look at this plant. And it's just like a tiny bit of critical, maybe I am just a sarky, bitchy person. But I'm just sitting there going, it almost sounds like you're taking credit for a plant that you did not grow. You bought that like it from the seller, either the seller or a business or whatever, and you are sitting there going, look at me, aren't I great? And it's just like, you're great at spending money. I don't know if the connection there, like, I don't know if these people were making that connection in their head, that it's just a bit like, you didn't grow that. Like, you get all of your gifts and your rewards if you're sitting there going, look at how well I've done and it's been growing for years and it's all nice and mature, and look at it, look at it, look at this. And at that point, big pat on the back from everybody, because it's just like, great, you've done a great job. Buying a plant that's already like that, congrats, you've spent a bit more money and got a bit more of a mature plant, I guess. So yeah, that's why my reviews always took longer, because I'm just sitting there going, I want to actually give people some value, and I can only talk about my own thing basically. I wanted to give people some value and just kind of go, okay, that plant might not be trendy anymore. That's saying something, that that plant within a year that it took me to do the review and actually tell you my experiences after a year of owning it at a minimum is not of interest anymore. Talk about disposable kind of mentality. But I'd rather give some value and say, no, this is exactly what the plant looked like when I got it. This is what it looks like now. And this has been the journey so far. And this is what I have learned. Again, my own experiences, yours might vary. But yeah, there was a lot of the like, nobody's showing you imperfect plants. A lot of the times they're showing you entirely perfect plants because they just bought the plant from the retailer. To make this a bit more kind of realistic, is somebody literally buying a brand new car. It comes off the kind of factory floor and you're just like, look at my beautiful car. And it's almost taking credit for something that's like, they think they're doing the same thing at that point, going, I have owned this car for 20 years. Look at how great it looks like. To it has just come off the factory floor. Isn't it beautiful? Look at what I have done. I'm just like, you've done what exactly? You've bought a car that is new, it's shiny, but you had nothing to do with that other than the fact that you paid for it. So I won't take that away from people, but you know what I mean? And how about the difference between skill and environment? And I'll use an extreme example of this. Somebody growing something, for example, like a staghorn fern in Florida or in Australia is very different from somebody growing exactly the same plant in Norway, in Sweden, in the UK, or in kind of Northern Europe or the northern part of the hemisphere. Very different conditions, because one is probably going to be quite close to maybe what the natural habitat is of that plant. And at that point, those plants might not be house plants. They might just be garden plants or even balcony plants, versus somebody growing exactly the same plant in entirely different conditions. The skill level for those two different plants is huge. It's absolutely huge. And I will caveat this slightly, because one of the things, and I don't think I've ever talked about this, and I love all of my viewers from some of the tropical parts of the world as well. And it always surprised me, and I always have like these conversations with people, because they'd be like, oh, I'm like from Barbados, or like somewhere that's really, really in my kind of brain, very tropical and very similar to where these plants might be growing naturally. Granted, not all of them, it depends. But they're asking me for advice, somebody who's growing this plant internally inside in the UK and all of that means. And I'm just like, my curiosity, and this, by the way, this is no shade at all. As I said, love these individuals. And it was interesting because I got the answer that I wanted from them, which was, I'm just like, why are you watching me? Like, not that I mind, please do continue watching. But I'm just like, why are you watching me? And this was kind of sad as well, because they're like, there's not much content generally that isn't done by white looking northerners or northern hemisphere, and it's nice to see a lot of like POCs that are coming in and they're really sharing like their experiences with this, but there's not a lot of content from tropical regions about tropical plants to serve other tropical regions, if that makes sense. So there's not a lot of people in these tropical locations creating content talking about their native tropical plants that will be addressed predominantly to people in that part of the world. Because a lot of us, if we're from the northern hemisphere, we're doing videos talking to what we assume, it's not always the case, as I've just said, other people from the northern hemisphere, because they might be struggling with exactly the same thing with the same plant that we are. So, and that's a shame as well, because if you think about it, there's a lot, like, it's unfair, because we will get like garden plants around, like, if you think about how many videos are there about like how to grow a rose in a garden. So if anybody from parts of the world where you can grow a rose wants to do that, there's an abundance. So hopefully that's going to start balancing out soon. It should really. But there is that difference that I was talking about between me growing this here and somebody growing exactly the same plant in Florida. The skill level or even the care, and I'm not putting any shade on anybody, is going to be different there. And I've got an example of a bulbophyllum orchid here as well. And again, same thing goes about light and conditions and all these things. We talked about the skill levels required to different geographic locations, but also we need to remember the environmental difference between those locations. I can only ever grow a lot of the bulbophyllum orchids indoors in the UK year round. Yes, I could potentially take some of them out in the UK in a garden. It would need to be shaded and maybe away from like the constant rain that we get in the summer and all these things, or I could just be lazy and not do that and just continue growing it indoors, versus somebody who might be growing them in an environment like we were talking about before, somebody who's in the tropics, and they can just grow these outside on their balcony in their garden because the conditions are different there as well. And that's the difference as well. It's almost the same where they are, because in the tropics, we talked about this before, the fluctuation between winter and summer, and somebody was saying this on a recent video, that they love the concept of winter, a cold season, and like the winter and summer, and we've got the wet season and the dry season. We would like seasons. And I get it. But it's different with how the care needs to be there, and the skills are going to be different as well. And let's put this as a polar opposite example. So a plant that might be growing natively well here, and I know this is a poor example because it can grow like a weed in a lot of locations, but say English ivy, yeah? Local to here, or even the roses actually. Roses are very much a thing that grows quite happily in the UK, and I can use the UK as an example. Roses can be a huge challenge in Greece and even Cyprus and slightly warmer locales, because their water needs, all of the other things that they're used to. If you think how different the climates are between these two, the people growing ivy, English ivy, or ferns. Ferns is another good one because it needs a lot of moisture. Ferns or even roses and all these things in those dry, arid conditions, that's a skill level that's insane. And it's not the same as me saying, look, I've grown a rose. What have you done? Nothing. It's just rained all the time, and it's pretty. Look at zero skill that I've done to grow this beautiful rose. And then there's somebody else who's got the same exact rose, maybe in Greece, maybe in Cyprus. It looks a bit busted. There's one bloom, and it's looking like this, and it's just like, look, I grew this rose, and it was just like, it looks like shit. And it's just like, of course it does. They are growing it somewhere entirely different to where it's meant to be growing, and nobody's giving that person its kind of props because you are growing this thing in almost the polar opposite of where it needs to grow, and it's still alive and it's got a bloom for you. Bigger props to that individual than me that's just growing it out in the ground and it's just getting rained on all the time. I haven't done anything for it. It's just growing naturally. But let's talk a bit more about reclaiming the hobby and what that might mean for a lot of us. What if thriving meant stability instead of spectacle? Instead of, look at me with this huge collection, look at this really rare plant, look at this variegated plant that I've got, versus, look, I've had this plant in my collection for 7 years now. Yeah, it's looking a bit busted. Got some crispy edges. It's winter. It's still surviving. And look at a new leaf, basically. There is some value to that as well. Thankfully, a lot of the hype that was happening around the social media, that kind of rare era, and that kind of the algorithm not being helpful in any way or form at that point, is pretty much at this point fully behind us. And you can see this from people when they're shifting their attitudes. Some people are downsizing. People are keeping some of the plants that they truly love. But they're also kind of realizing that their plants can't be their entire life. They need to be a part of that life, but not their entire life. It's no longer a Pokemon game. It's no longer, I need this leaf to be as mature as possible. What is happening a bit more now, thankfully, is us kind of going, oh, this is great. Look at this plant. I've had it for years. It's so cool. And it's still surviving in my conditions. And I'm not growing it in the best of primo conditions. It's still alive and it's still doing okay. But there is that kind of movement, and I encourage people as well, the kind of notion of maybe slightly fewer plants, maybe just observing your plants instead of needing to fix everything all the time. Just observe the plants. Ultimately, we need to maybe remember, and I'm hoping that a lot of people that are still within the hobby, because I think there was a big boom of people coming into the hobby to make a quick buck and then leaving, the people that were still left within the hobby, I'm assuming most of us got into this because we wanted to bring a bit of green and a bit of nature into our living spaces. First and foremost, more than anything else, and maybe the weird kooky plant, but ultimately we're bringing some of nature in to help us, because I think this is the thing we all forget. In the winter and autumn time when things are slowing down, and it's just like, ugh, I wish spring would come, or winter and all these things, and it's like pissing me off. But remember why we did this to begin with, because a lot of the time in spring and summer for a lot of locations, you're spending a lot of time outside. If anything, your collection, yes, is growing, which is good, but it's also the time of the year where you probably see it a lot less because you're out in nature a bit more, because the weather is better. Arguably the time where we should be just taking a pause and actually enjoying. I mean, look, I've got a jungle in the UK, and it's now the middle of February. It's currently snowing outside, or it's meant to be snowing. I don't know if it is. It hasn't started snowing yet. But this is still alive. Tropical plants, middle of winter, going to be snowing outside soon. Take a moment to appreciate that. I think that's something that we all maybe just need to take that tiny bit of a step back and just go, oh, yeah, this is cool. This is really, really cool. But over to you all, and I'm curious to see how your expectations have changed within the hobby. How are you doing things differently? What pressure, if any, are you putting on yourselves? How are you doing things differently these days versus maybe what it was during the rare plant era, or even like, have you gone back to what it was like, the slower hobby element, like what it was before? Or are you moving in a different kind of direction altogether, and you look at things differently and you want different things from your collection now, even versus the rare plant versus the slower era and all of these things? How are you experiencing your plants and your collection currently? And if you want to share any anecdotes of like the algorithm era, or like the rare plant era, or even the kind of what it was like before, because I also know, and I love all of my audience to bits as well, but it's really heartening as well to know that some of my audiences are not super young either, and they've been doing this for decades, and I love it when you all tell me how long you've been caring for plants, and it's immensely invaluable, and I want to see more of the rest of you all kind of going, this person's been doing this for 40 or 50 years. Maybe don't bother them too much, but maybe ask them some questions on those comments, because like, look, they've been doing it for years. These are the real experts. They're fantastic at doing this. But yes, tell me some of your experiences. Did you go through all of that journey? Did you not? Like, give me all of it down below. I'd love to know a bit more. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.